Welcome back to the deep dive. Before we even crack open today's stack of sources,
Yeah.
I actually have a very quick, very important favor to ask you.
Just a small one.
Right. If these deep dives are helping you cut through the noise and actually understand the world around you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the show right now.
It really helps us keep the lights on.
It does, and it ensures we can keep bringing you this kind of unfiltered analysis.
Yeah.
And today, unfiltered is definitely the operating word.
Oh, absolutely. Unfiltered is putting it mildly.
Yeah, today we are tackling something that frames itself less as a book and, well, more as a declaration of war. We are looking at the ebook Spiritual Remilitarization, Psychological Rearmament Against Satanic Ideologies by Conrad Riker.
This is quite a title.
It is. And right off the bat, I have to say, this isn't a self-help book in the traditional sense. It's not about how to organize your closet or hack your morning routine.
No, not at all. Riker is very explicit in his introduction. He calls this text a weapon. He's really not interested in comforting the reader. He is interested in arming them.
Exactly. It's designed for the man who feels that specific burning in his gut, that sense that something is fundamentally structurally wrong with the world, and that he's been lied to about what that something actually is.
And we should clarify the target audience here. He describes this as a blueprint for the red-pilled man, the men's rights activist, or really anyone in the manosphere who is done playing defense and wants to go on the offensive.
Yeah, he says it's for the lion who seeks to dethrone false idols.
Right.
Now, before we really dive into the deep end, we need to make something crystal clear to you listening. We are dealing with highly charged, very provocative source material today.
Extremely charged.
Yes, and whether the content leans right-wing, left-wing, or anywhere between, we are not taking sides. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the author or any political faction. Our mission in this deep dive is strictly to impartially report on the content provided and convey the ideas contained in the original source material.
We are just here to break down the argument so you can understand what's actually in this text.
Exactly. We're just the messengers. So if you are looking for a comfortable, easy listen that validates the mainstream narrative, this is where you might want to tap out.
But if you want to understand the blueprint for what Riker calls a new manosphere Jerusalem, you're going to want to stick around.
And honestly, if this sounds like the kind of tactical manual you've been waiting for, you should head over to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now and buy the full ebook. What we're doing today is just the recon. The actual weaponry is in those pages.
Should we get right into the diagnosis? Because he starts with a very heavy concept.
The PSYOP.
Yes, the PSYOP.
Let's unpack this. The book opens by telling the reader that they have been under siege their entire life. He describes an invisible war that is embedded in literally everything. Our education systems, the media we consume, even the corporate hierarchies we work in.
Riker uses a specific term for this. He calls it the phantom front.
The phantom front.
The core idea there is that men have been conditioned to believe they are free, when in reality, they are operating inside a psychological prison. He has this very striking line that sets the tone for the whole book. He says, men have mistaken the chains placed upon their minds for fashion accessories.
Wow. That is a brutal image. I mean, it implies that men are actually proud of the very things that restrict them.
Precisely. The argument here is that male biological imperatives, chivalry, the instinct to protect women, the drive to provide, even basic male empathy, all of that has been weaponized against men.
He describes it as a parasitic mechanism, right?
He does, because you aren't just fighting a standard enemy, you are fighting an enemy that knows your source code.
Yeah.
They use your own virtues to disarm you.
Which leads to probably the most provocative term in the entire book. He describes the modern ideological landscape using the term men camp.
Right. Now, obviously, we have to unpack that because it is a radioactive term.
Very radioactive.
Riker is intentionally drawing a parallel to the rhetorical frameworks used by totalitarian regimes of the 20th century. He's arguing that modern feminist literature and academic grievance studies operate on the exact same logic of authoritarian scapegoating.
So, just as historical tyrannies needed a phantom enemy to mobilize the mob.
Modern ideology has created the toxic male, or the patriarchy.
Right.
In this text, the patriarchy isn't a real system of governance. He describes it as a linguistic shapeshifter, an unfalsifiable conspiracy theory.
Unfalsifiable meaning you can't ever disprove it.
Exactly. If it rains, it's the patriarchy. If there's a wage gap, it's the patriarchy. It's used as a blanket term to blame men for everything and justify what Riker calls the dispossession of the male class.
There's another concept he uses to explain how this works intellectually, which I actually found really helpful for understanding the current cultural climate. He talks about standpoint epistemology. Now, that sounds like pure academic word salad. How does he break that down for the average guy?
It's crucial to understand this if you want to know why logic seems to fail in modern arguments. Riker calls it a satanic inversion of logic.
Satanic inversion. Okay.
In plain English, standpoint epistemology is the idea that feelings trump facts. It asserts that your knowledge is determined entirely by your social standing or your level of oppression.
So the more oppressed you claim to be, the more true your statement is.
That's the mechanism. And conversely, if you are a privileged male, your logic is invalid by default. Riker calls this the solipsistic cage.
The solipsistic cage, meaning you're trapped in someone else's subjective reality.
Exactly. If a woman feels unsafe, you are dangerous, regardless of your actions or your intent. Reality is literally rewritten by emotion.
That sounds incredibly frustrating if you're trying to operate on facts and data.
Well, it's designed to be frustrating. It's designed to silence you. It creates what the book calls a gynocentric social contract. And this brings us to one of the strongest arguments in the text, the syllogism of disposability.
I found this part fascinating because it completely flips the script on the idea of privilege. The book argues that men are actually the exploited class. Walk us through the logic there.
The premise is quite simple. A privileged class is not coerced into dying.
Right.
But look at history. Look at the law. Men are the only ones subject to military conscription. Men account for the vast majority of deaths in hazardous labor, oil rigs, logging, deep-sea fishing.
So his conclusion is,
Therefore, men are not privileged. They are disposable.
the example that really stuck with me from the source, and I think everyone knows this story, was the Titanic.
Yeah.
We all have this romantic view of women and children first, right? Like it's this noble, chivalrous thing.
Riker shatters that romance completely. He views the Titanic not as a tragedy of nature, but as a crime scene of institutionalized male sacrifice.
He sure does. He points out that 1,500 men didn't drown because they were just being nice. They drowned because armed officers with pistols forced them to stay back at gunpoint. The book frames men as biological buffers, basically human sandbags used to protect women from danger.
And he extends that Titanic metaphor directly to the modern economy.
How so?
He argues the tax code is just the modern version of those pistols. You are expected to drown in red ink, to work yourself to death, to keep the state afloat so it can support everyone else.
Let's talk about how this mindset captured the institutions, because the book goes hard on the history of education. He talks about a time before these institutions were captured by what he calls feminist and Marxist ideologies.
Right. He describes modern universities as indoctrination mills. Riker tracks the shift from the classical trivium, which was grammar, logic, and rhetoric, teaching you how to think, to what he calls the triviality.
Which is grievance studies.
Exactly. It's the study of how to complain effectively. Instead of learning to build bridges or analyze philosophy, you learn to deconstruct everything through the lens of oppression. The book actually cites the grievance studies hoax to prove the academic bankruptcy here.
Oh, the dog park thing. I remember reading about that a few years ago.
Yes. For those who don't know, 3 scholars wrote fake papers with absolutely absurd premises, like studying rape culture amongst dogs in Portland dog parks.
Which is just, it's so ridiculous.
It is. But these papers were accepted and published by prestigious academic journals. Riker uses this to prove that the universities are no longer about truth. They are temples of a cult where reality is sacrificed for ideology.
And part of that ideology is what he calls herstory.
Herstory, yes, he satirizes this mercilessly. He describes the modern historical narrative as a series of falls from Eden to Seneca Falls.
Seneca Falls being the site of the first women's rights convention.
Right. The argument is that the modern narrative claims women have been oppressed for all of human history. Riker argues the exact opposite. He says that history is actually the struggle of men to protect women from the brutality of nature.
It's a harsh critique. He basically says, while women were historically protected indoors, critiquing the architecture, men were out there draining the swamps and building the power grids.
It's a total rejection of the victim narrative. He's saying civilization was built by men for the protection of women, and now the protected class is claiming to be the victims of the builders.
There is a very dark statistic he brings up regarding what he calls the baby billion.
Yes, this is where the satanic aspect of the subtitle comes into play heavily. He cites 1.5 billion abortions globally since 1980.
1.5 billion.
He frames this not as healthcare, but as a blood sacrifice on the altar of the self. It's the ultimate expression of placing convenience over life, which he views as the spiritual opposite of the masculine instinct to protect life.
And from that moral cost, he moves to the financial cost. The fiscal burden to the matriarchy. What's the math he uses there?
The math, according to the source, is that men pay the vast majority of net federal income taxes, while women are net consumers of state resources.
So it's essentially a wealth transfer.
A massive one. From producers, mostly men, to the coalition of the aggrieved. He argues the state acts as a proxy husband.
A proxy husband.
Yes. Extracting resources from men via taxation to support women, who then vote for big government to ensure that extraction continues.
And within the corporate world, this shows up as DEI.
Which Riker redefines as displace everyone intelligent.
I laughed at that, I have to admit.
Yeah.
But the example he uses is James Damore at Google. Why does he focus on that specific case?
It's the perfect case study for his argument about the war on logos. James Damore was an engineer who used logic and data to suggest that maybe biological differences, not sexism, explain why there are fewer female engineers in tech.
You didn't go on a rant, he just wrote a reasoned memo.
And he was fired immediately, fired and publicly shamed. The book uses this to show that logos, meaning logic, reason, facts, is now treated as a hate crime if it contradicts the feminist imperative. You cannot reason with the system because the system is immune to reason.
So we've got a captured education system, a rigged economy, and a culture war where logic is basically outlawed. If you stop there, it's pretty depressing. But the book is titled Spiritual Remilitarization. So what is the solution? I assume we're not just sitting around complaining on the internet.
No, and Riker is very clear about that. He says, the war for your soul is over. You have won. Now you have to act. The core solution is a return to logos over chaos.
Order over emotion.
Correct. He suggests a syllogistic boot camp. You have to literally relearn how to think using deductive reasoning because that is the only weapon that cuts through emotionalist garbage. You have to train your brain to reject emotional manipulation entirely.
And he gives some really specific physical practices too. Thermogenic prayer. This stood out to me because I absolutely hate cold showers.
Most people do, which is exactly the point. He advises using cold water exposure, freezing showers, ice baths, not just for health, but as a spiritual act of defiance.
How is shivering in an ice bath defiance? I mean, who are you defying?
It burns away the fat of the ego. It rejects the modern comfort that keeps you docile. Riker argues that modern society seduces you with comfort. By choosing pain, by choosing the freeze, you harden the mind. If you can master the freeze response in the shower, you can master the emotional response when society screams at you.
Speaking of hardening the mind, he talks about the inner citadel.
This is straight stoicism, directly referencing Marcus Aurelius. Riker advises creating a gated community of the mind. You have to cut the cord. No mainstream media, no Netflix, and absolutely no doom scrolling.
He calls doom scrolling intellectual masturbation, right?
He does. He says every minute you spend complaining online is a minute surrendered to the enemy. You need to starve the beast of your attention. Stop consuming their propaganda.
That leads perfectly into his rebranding of MGTOW men going their own way. A lot of people think of that as just guys giving up on dating or taking their ball and going home. But Riker frames it differently.
He frames it as a strategic general strike. He uses the analogy of the 1981 PTO air traffic controllers strike.
Break that down for us. How does a labor strike apply to dating and marriage?
The idea is that male labor, male attention, and male protection are the electricity that runs civilization. Civilization cannot function without men doing the hard, dangerous, and dirty jobs.
Right.
If you withhold that, if you stop validating, stop protecting, and start producing for a system that hates you, the system collapses. It's not about being lonely, it's about economic and social warfare. You are removing your battery from their machine.
So it's a strike until the conditions change.
Mm-hmm.
But while you're striking, you have to build something else. This is the parallel structure he talks about.
This is the visionary part of the book. He talks about building a new manosphere Jerusalem, a techno-traditional future. You don't ask for permission to enter their institutions. You build your own that are simply better.
And going gold is the economic strategy for that.
Right. Referencing Atlas Shrugged.
Right.
Riker advocates using Bitcoin and cryptocurrency to escape the fiat currency tax farm.
Tax farm.
Yeah.
I love that imagery.
It's very vivid. He argues that by using crypto and the gig economy, you bypass corporate HR departments, which he calls the ideological gatekeepers, and you minimize your taxable footprint. You stop funding the very state that wants to replace you.
And it's not just digital. He talks about the treehouse protocol.
This is about physical spaces,
Yeah.
creating male-only clubs, legal defense funds, and communities that are lawsuit-proof and ideologically hermetic.
Meaning sealed off.
Exactly. Basically, you build spaces where the woke mind virus literally cannot enter because you don't let it in. You verify everyone at the door.
And the most important institution to recapture, according to Riker, is the family. Specifically, the resurrection of the patriarch.
This is the long game. He calls for fathers to remove their sons from the state school system immediately. He views public schools as moral castration centers designed to turn boys into defective girls.
So homeschooling isn't just a nice option for him, it's a requirement.
In this blueprint, yes. You have to raise your sons with logic, stoicism, and martial discipline to ensure they aren't indoctrinated. You are biologically manufacturing freedom fighters for the next generation.
It really is a total overhaul of lifestyle. Before we get to the ending, I just want to remind you listeners, if this blueprint sounds like the strategy you've been looking for, you need to get the full manual. Check Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks for spiritual remilitarization. We can only cover so much here, and there are chapters on specific legal strategies we just don't have the time for today.
The ending of the book uses a really clever reinterpretation of a classic fable, The Boy Who Cried Wolf.
I love this part. In the version we all know, the boy is a liar who plays tricks and eventually gets eaten by the wolves.
But in the red-pilled version Riker presents, the boy isn't a liar at all. He is the red-pilled manosphere. He is screaming that the wolves are coming, demographic collapse, economic ruin, cultural decay. He sees the danger clearly.
But the villagers don't listen.
The villagers are the NPCs, the blue-pilled masses who are comfortable in their ignorance. They mock him, call him an alarmist, call him an incel, tell him to just be quiet. So what does the boy do?
He stops screaming.
Exactly. He realizes shouting is useless. He stops trying to save people who don't want to be saved. He builds a fortress. He stocks up on ammo. He trains. And when the wolves finally come, because the wolves are real, the boy survives in his citadel while the villagers who mocked him are devoured.
That is a chilling but incredibly empowering message for his audience. It's not about saving everyone, it's about saving yourself and your brothers who are willing to listen.
It transitions into what he calls the final crusade. But he clarifies this isn't fought with swords, it's fought with relentless logic. It's about constructing a golden age built on truth and masculine virtue that simply outcompetes the old rotting system.
He has that line, we do not want to conquer them, we want to surpass them so thoroughly that their ideology becomes a museum exhibit.
That is the ultimate victory, not destruction, but obsolescence.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener?
It means you have a choice. Riker's message is that the gynocentric matrix is a house of cards. It's totally unstable. You can stay in it and collapse with it, or you can become the architect of your fate.
Suit up. That's the final sentiment of the book.
Indeed, it's a call to duty.
Before we wrap, here is a final provocative thought for you to chew on that builds on Riker's premise. If men actually do initiate this strategic general strike and completely withdraw their labor and taxes, does that actually starve the beast? Or does it give the captured institutions the perfect excuse to automate those jobs and usher in a universal basic income that completely solidifies their control over the remaining population?
Wow, that is a heavy thought to leave them with.
It's the next level of the chess match. If you want to dive deeper into Conrad Riker's work and honestly get the unfiltered intelligence he can't publish on mainstream platforms, you need to follow him. His Substack is where the real deep dives happen. That's Conrad Riker. You can find him on Twitter for the daily updates at Conrad Riker. And join the War Room on YouTube at Conrad Riker.
There is a lot more material there for those ready to do the actual work.
Absolutely. And one last time, go buy the ebook on Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks. It's called Spiritual Remilitarization. It's a heavy read, but if you made it this far, it's probably a weapon you need in your arsenal.
It is necessary reading for the target audience.
Thank you for listening to The Deep Dive. Please smash that like button, subscribe to the show so we can keep bringing you these insights. And remember, the war for your soul is over. You have won. Now go build something. We'll see you next time.